So today's webinar is identifying partners and creating opportunities, enhancing access to recreation. I am now going to pass over the mic to our first presenter, Carla Gilbride, with the Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes. Carla, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Emily. It's great to be with everyone today, and I'm looking forward to, for the next 90 minutes, discussing how to make recreation opportunities more accessible and to find and connect with those opportunities in your local community by finding local chapters of nationwide organizations or through making partnerships with other local groups. And with me today, I have four excellent co-presenters. As Emily mentioned, I was the co-founder of the Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes about 10 years ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But also here on behalf of the Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes is Kevin Andrews. Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Carla. I'm Kevin Andrews. I'm MWABA board secretary. I'm also a blind athlete and organizer, and really happy to be here today. And we're going to be talking about kind of we really center joy, movement, and connection through kind of tandem cycling and other adaptive sports. And we connect folks with these sort of recreational opportunities, blind and low vision people in the DC region. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. We also have with us two folks on behalf of Achilles International. First, James Murphy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Murphy. I am the chapter lead for Achilles International's DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia chapter, as well as the assistant director of the veterans program, the Freedom Team. Personally, I'm involved in many veterans nonprofits, including Move United, Warfighters, Wooden Warrior Project, USA Warriors Ice Hockey, and others.
Great to be with you, James. And Samantha Sinek, or if you prefer Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Carla. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Sinek. I'm the program coordinator and also a longtime guide of the DC, Maryland, and Virginia Achilles International chapter. I started guiding in 2019, and I've competed in a ton of 10Ks and half marathons supporting our athletes. Right now, I support our weekly workouts in DC on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I make sure that our athletes have the support that they need to walk, run, and cycle while fostering a really strong and welcoming community across our 3 states.
Great. Thanks so much, Sam. Last but certainly not least, we have Andrew Hogan here with us on behalf of Catalyst Sports. Andrew, would you like to say hey to everyone?
Thank you, Carla. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Hogan. I am the Greater DC Region Chapter Coordinator for Catalyst Sports. Catalyst is a nonprofit whose mission is to make adventure sports more accessible to people with physical disabilities. We have 14 chapters in the Southeast region, including activities like rock climbing, mountain biking, hiking, and kayaking. In DC region, we hold events for rock climbing, which we've done since 2016, and we're recently starting an adaptive mountain biking clinic. I'm a biologist by training, and I'm also a guide for visually impaired athletes, as well as the para-liaison for USA Climbing's Paraclinic division. And it's hard to see, but I have cute Catalyst earrings on as well, so I like to include adaptive sports in my fashion as well. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about all of these groups and the different activities that they offer. But first, before we get into more of the details about, the different activities that you folks all do, I wanted to open with sort of a broader question to set sort of the themes for the discussion. And that question is, what does the phrase accessible recreation mean to you? And how have you accessed or been part of accessible recreation opportunities in your local community? Kevin, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. So being mindful of time and constraints, of course. So my story is that I moved to the DC, the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia region in 2019. So I've been here just over 6 years, and it's a hell of a thing. You move to a place and you don't really know a lot of people, especially in a big city. So we all know what happened in 2020. Some stuff happened. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. And I had kind of Googled like how to make friends, how to meet people in a big city, and like I was trying to learn my new job or whatever. And then the pandemic happened, obviously. And so I had seen some stuff about it, our group, the Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes. I might just start saying MWABA, which we kind of call it in our sort of colloquial spaces. And I would say that I had kind of come across it and didn't really know much about it. And then COVID. So I didn't really start participating in our stuff until about 2021. But to actually answer your question, accessible recreation to me really means not having to earn your place. It's kind of belonging from the beginning. It's without needing, in the context of blindness, to perform sightedness, and it means also, at least to me, you don't have to hide your needs. You can just be very clear on what you need. Being able to show up as you are, neurodivergent, disabled, human, messy, whatever, and still kind of be safe and included. I think that's really, really important, especially in these times that we're in. At MWABA, accessible recreation it's really both sort of physical and relational. So it's about, for us anyway, it's about building predictable low barrier access points. So like these group tandem rides that we'll probably talk about later, tandem bicycling rides. They don't require fancy gear or even prior experience. We've had people show up who, oh, well, I haven't been on a bike in 40 years and I'm losing my vision and or whatever. And being able to create space for disabled people to connect with each other. For me, being on a tandem bike isn't just about the bike, right? It's about teamwork, trust, and not being alone. And being able to move through public space boldly without apology, being able to show up as your take up room beyond the trails, Capitol Crescent, just as an example, or Anacostia River Trail. When I ride with MWABA, I'm never thinking about what I can't do, right? I'm thinking about the wind in my face, the trust I have in my tandem captain, that's the person in the front, and the people laughing next to me. To me, that's access and that's freedom. And that's really what accessible recreation looks like to me. So I'll pass it off to whoever wants to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was really, I resonated with a lot of your remarks as a blind athlete myself. Those are a lot of the things that, accessible recreation means and has meant to me. But to hear a maybe slightly different perspective on that topic, let's throw it over to Sam to talk about the perspective of a guide and a volunteer. What does accessible recreation mean to you, Sam?
Yeah, thanks so much, Carla. And Kevin, I really liked how you said belonging from the beginning. Um, for me, I joined accessible recreation through sports and fitness as a guide for Achilles. And my story really was I went to a running store for a group that wasn't accessible. And someone from Achilles came up to that group and said, "Hey, we need someone to help us guide." And everybody was kind of quiet and almost didn't acknowledge the person who came up to us. And I thought to myself, well, I'm running. This person wants to run. Let's do it. Let's do it together. And similar to Kevin, I was new to DC and I hadn't really met anyone yet who could tell me the good restaurants and the good places to go for a run or a walk. And the first athlete that I ever guided, shared all of that with me. And I just love the community. So that's a little bit about my story about how I got to it. In terms of what it means to me, I think it definitely is. I think accessible recreation is this ability to have the opportunities where everyone, regardless of their ability can fully participate, right? It's about adapting and modifying from the beginning so that folks feel like they can belong and that everyone can compete and play or just enjoy movement together. And I really enjoyed preparing athletes for half marathons that they've wanted to run. I ran with a guide for a really I was a guide for an athlete for a really long time, and we decided we wanted to do the Myrtle Beach half marathon together. And so we spent Wednesdays doing our speed workout and our hill workouts on the National Mall, doing our long runs on Haynes Point, developing our training plan together, building that trust, working together with the tether, making sure we had our own shorthand for how I would alert that athlete to obstacles in their path. And we had such a great time. We drove down to South Carolina. We stayed with a bunch of other Achilles athletes and guides. And my personal favorite memory is after the race, we all ran down to the ocean, to the beach, and we jumped in. And it was just so much joy and connection and community. For me, it really hits home that belonging piece that Kevin mentioned. And to be honest, hiking with MWABA, just recently I went with Kevin and Carla on a hike to Catoctin Mountain Park. And that might be the toughest thing that I've ever done. I feel like it was such a challenge for everyone there, but the energy in the group was so incredible. Nobody backed down. Everybody was enthusiastic about the challenge. And everyone was constantly checking in with one another. What do you need? What do you need? What's going to make you feel the most comfortable? And we completed this really strenuous 3.9-mile hike. And I think that mutual support that I experienced and the teamwork, like Kevin said, is really all about, that's what accessible recreation is all about.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I wanted to now bring into the conversation, and I also, as you mentioned, was on that hike. And the one thing that Sam didn't add, in addition to the terrain being challenging, was a very hot, muggy, sticky day, and people were sharing their water and sharing their food and making sure everyone had enough fluids. So, sort of taking care of each other is another piece that I would add to that, the themes that others have been raising. But I wanted to bring James into the conversation to talk sort of from the perspective of, leading a chapter of one of these nationwide organizations that we'll be discussing. James, what is, and I know you have you mentioned a few in your intro, in addition to Achilles. So if you want to talk a little bit about what accessible recreation means from your perspective of sort of leading a chapter of a nationwide organization.
Yeah, of course. I don't think it can be understated how people like Sam and guys like Andrew really create that accessible space within recreation. So from the organization's perspective, I think accessible recreation means seeking to remove barriers to participate in activity. So rather than saying someone's contraindicated, we look to enable their participation. It's having a flexible and creative mindset. It's instead of going directly through a limitation, it's identifying it and then finding a way around it. So for a personal example, I don't think I mentioned that first, but I'm a disabled veteran myself. I participate in jujitsu at Estilo Jiu-Jitsu in DC. That's a martial art, something that's usually would usually contraindicate me from. Um, Instead, what I've learned is how to maneuver my body around my injuries, so that I can continue to participate in that activity, and that's kept me compliant in my own activity. I use it as an occupational therapy modality. Um, and so that's given me a sport where I can set goals, and it's given me a network, and that's what we seek to provide.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that, James. Andrew, I wanted to bring you in to talk from the perspective of Catalyst, and I know you do other guiding and adventures on the side, in addition to your Catalyst work. So if you want to talk from your own perspective, what does the prompt of accessible recreation bring to mind?
Thanks, Carla. To me, when I hear accessible recreation, I think creating spaces and opportunities where the technical challenges for recreation are diminished and the community required for recreation are created. So the first one, I think a lot of people would assume correctly that some adaptive equipment or gear in general can be expensive, which can be a limitation, which is true. Especially, I know from the adaptive mountain bike folks, their bikes are really cool, but they're kind of pricey. So not everyone can just, go and buy a bike on a whim. Um, but also the skill set. Rock climbing, both indoors and outdoors, has become a relatively safe activity now due to equipment, technique, and skills we use to mitigate risk, where it can become a lot more accessible from not only the safety and fear component, but that's also a skill set that you don't learn overnight. So creating organizations that help do all that front work for people so that way they can partake in those opportunities without having to do a lot of upfront investment on their own, or they decide if they really like it. And the second and most important is community. I mean, I think it goes without saying, listening to every other one of the other panelists talk right now with how amazing and important these groups have been to them and the really great memories you all shared. I think just highlights that recreation isn't just about exercise or experience. It's about being able to do those experiences with people you care about and can relate to. Um, and I think for me, from a chapter coordinator perspective, it's about bringing in athletes, volunteers, community members to all make these events happen in a way that not only reduces the technical barriers I talked about, but makes it much more welcoming and approachable, but enjoyable for the participants. Because, climbing isn't just about, pinching rocks or fake plastic on a wall and getting your arms sore, right? It's about the adventure and the exploration. And I think especially in accessible recreation, it's so much more important. I've had many list climbers mention to me that just having a space where they can climb with other people that share, their experience, their navigation of the world in a way that us able-bodied folks understand or relate to is so important. And I'm sure James feels that way too. Not all of his day-to-day work, but especially in his veteran communities. Um, so yeah, I think just preparation as easy as possible from a technical perspective, but helping provide the communities people are looking for when they're not sure where to start.
Yeah, and just to sort of tack on a couple of my own thoughts and observations at the end after listening to all of you, I think that one of the great things about um, building a low barrier community and through accessible recreation is finding people with common experience that you can sort of relate to, as others have said, but also maybe if you've done things that you haven't done and can give you the confidence to try those things that you haven't tried. This other person, who has the same disability as me, they're figuring out a way to do this. I guess there is a way to do it. So it's not just the sort of technical reduction of barriers through having the equipment and having other people to spot you and teach you. But I think there's also a confidence that comes from having sort of role models of more experienced people who, are similar to you in the sense of the disability that you have, but perhaps have more experience with a particular sport or particular activity and can kind of show you through their example what the options are and kind of that can cause you to re-examine your own um, maybe attitudinal barriers or fear or things that may be holding you back. That's another thing that I think is really valuable about these spaces is people encouraging each other and giving each other sort of a safe space to try new things. So I want to move us along to talk a little bit more about the details of some of these activities and some of these organizations that are available in many communities. And then we'll from there sort of transition to talking a little bit about things you can do to create opportunities if one of these chapters is not available in the community where you live. But many of the groups you've heard about today have local chapters, throughout the Mid-Atlantic region and throughout the country. And I'd like to turn to James to talk a little bit about Achilles International. If you also, James, want to talk about Wounded Warrior Project, how, what those groups look like, what activities they offer, and how folks can get connected to them.
Definitely. So for Achilles International, the first place I would say to start is our website, achillesinternational.org. On there, there's a bunch of options for wherever you are to find a chapter. There's a tab at the top. If you are in the DMV region, you can go to achillesinternational.org/Washington-DC or achillesinternational.org/Baltimore. We also have Instagram that is at Achilles Washington DC. If you also type in Achilles DMV in the search bar on Instagram, you could find us. Those for all of the above, I will be the direct receiver of any communications. We expect to reach people far and wide, so we fully expect for people to answer that call. In addition to that, I mentioned in the last prompt that adaptive sports can be an occupational therapy modality. Lots of medical centers are beginning to recognize that as well. You see more and more recreational therapists, you see more and more adaptive sports program managers, and then you also get primary care managers that are kind of in the know with a lot of organizations. So if you're interested in a particular activity, you can also reach out to one of your care providers. If they know us, chances are they'd recommend you if you're not contraindicated from an activity. If they don't know us, chances are they'll probably look into us, and that could be a potential partnership to help us reach further and wider. Um, Now, you mentioned the veterans groups. There are a lot that are out there. A lot of them look a little bit differently. Some are service providing organizations like Achilles, meaning we will host the workouts or we will host the events. So some of the nonprofits look like that. Others will help with, say, benefits claims. And then some will do both. So something like Wounded Warrior Project, they will have bike rides and PTSD related events, combat related PTSD serving events. And then they will also help you with your benefits claims. Semper Fi Fund is much of the same. Vail Veterans Program is a service providing organization, meaning they will provide you with adaptive winter sports. USA Warriors Ice Hockey is another service providing organization where they'll provide you with stand up and sit down sled hockey. Those are just to name a few, but there are a ton out there. And if anyone's interested to learn more, I'm tapped in with a lot of those organizations coming from Walter Reed. So please don't hesitate to reach out at jmurphy at achillesinternational.org. Chances are I can get you to the right place.
I'm sorry, Carla. This is Maynard. Could you angle your mouthpiece a little bit? Great, thank you.
Thanks for that really comprehensive list, James. It's exciting to hear how many different opportunities are available, and that, Google can be a good gateway to tell you what some of them are, but it's always also helpful to have a person you can, reach out to for specific questions. Um, I wanted to just tack on a couple other nationwide organizations that James didn't mention, that may be of interest and that also have local chapters or ways of sort of making local connections. One of those is called Move United, and we'll be showing a resource slide at the end of the presentation, which will have websites, and that one is on there. Move United is actually a merger of two long-running adaptive sports organizations. One was called Adaptive Sports, one was called Disabled Sports. They offer competitions as well as local chapters where people can try different sports, and they provide the adaptive equipment so that, as Andrew was mentioning earlier, some of the adaptive equipment that you might need to participate in certain sports is expensive, and so the local chapter can get you connected and get you the opportunity to try out some things and gain the skills without having to personally invest in expensive equipment if you don't, can't afford it or just don't know for sure that you're going to like the sport and you just want to try it out. So Move United is another resource that you can look into. If you are not, if you don't happen to be close to where there is a local Achilles chapter to get you connected with running and walking with a guide, but you're interested in running or walking with a guide, or doing tandem cycling with a guide, there is a service called United in Stride, and their website is unitedinstride.org, which will basically allow you to create a profile, and you say where you live, what sort of activities you're looking to do out of the ones that I mentioned, and sort of a little bit more about how far you want to go, what pace you like to run or walk at, and the service will connect you with people who are interested in sort of match up on those parameters in terms of wanting to do the same activity, living geographically close, and having a similar sort of distance and guide, or distance and pace, and will allow you to contact each other on the site, and then you can exchange contact information and meet in person, and that service is has folks nationwide, so regardless of where you live, it's a great place to kind of tap into whatever networks might exist there. There are also some social media, Facebook groups um, for various adaptive sports that sort of do similar things. I'm on some Facebook groups for blind runners, blind triathletes, and people are very helpful in those spaces in terms of sort of sharing tips and tricks and suggestions for gear and suggestions for running partners. But United in Stride is a particularly good place to just get started to tap into some of those community resources. So Andrew, I'd like to bring you in to talk about a little bit more about what Catalyst offers, how to get connected, and any other local groups in the DMV area that you're familiar with that you want to give a shout out to.
Thank you, Carla. So if you go to the Catalyst Sports website, there is information there that's broken down by either sport activity or location. From there, you can get in contact with your local chapter as well as register for one of our events. What's also great about our region is we have a lot of different organizations that are offering different types of accessible recreation. One great organization is Pursuit Adaptive Sports and Recreation. This is a nonprofit that was started by a retired professor in the area, and their mission is to help offer events but connect. Their literal mission is to connect people with organizations, right? So they'll streamline this process for you 100%. So that's Pursuit Sports. They'll list upcoming events for every different type of category. So there's usually some type of meetup that meets everyone's interest or accessibility level. Another great resource in the Richmond area is Sportable. Sportable does adaptive sports by a large range of different sports, and so I think they have a total of like 15 to 20. So there's a lot of different opportunities there as well. And another great piece of advice I always tell people is if you're unsure of a organization or community, just always reach out to local gyms or government, offices, because sometimes the employees there will be aware of a group or they'll work with one. So, Sport Rock Climbing Center is our host gym for our adaptive rock climbing groups in the DC area. We started as a grassroots community on our own back in 2015 and joined Catalyst in 2016. And the local gym let us hold our events for free, and they still do, because they think that type of financial barrier and access is important to break down as well. And so just reaching out to people, if you don't know where to go directly to the source of where an event might be. The adaptive sports recreation community is pretty open and collaborative, and so we always try to find something. For people who might not be directly in this area, I just also want to mention a couple other awesome organizations. Adaptive Climbing Group has adaptive rock climbing in Chicago, New York, and the Massachusetts area. Paradox Sports has a lot of events on the West Coast. They also do a lot of really cool adventure recreation activities like ice climbing, and so they'll be all over the place. They hold trainings as well. They might even be able to come to this region. And then Touchstone Climbing, they have an adaptive climbing group, I believe, out in San Francisco or in California. So I think I've been in this space since 2018, and even over the past 3 to 5 years, there's been such a explosion in growth of adaptive sports, adaptive recreation, accessibility to these types of events. So don't be discouraged if you've tried to look before and haven't found anything. There's always new groups and chapters popping up. So yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out. We're very friendly.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I can vouch for Paradox Sports as an organization. I have gone on a couple of their ice climbing trips, one in New Hampshire and one in Colorado, and found them to be incredible experiences. Really well run, really fun group of people, and just awesome wintertime adventures. And speaking of winter sports, it's hard to think about right now as we sit here in July in the 90-degree heat here in DC, but there are a lot of adaptive skiing and other snow sports, snowboarding, opportunities. And often, we've been talking about nationwide organizations or regional organizations that offer programming, and there certainly are groups like that for winter sports. I've participated in one up in Vermont called Vermont Adaptive, which has clinics at several different ski slopes around the state. But one thing I've found, having been a skier for about 20 years or so, is that often if you just call up a particular area where you want to go skiing, the mountains themselves will have an adaptive program that isn't a larger regional or nationwide program, but is just specific to that one ski mountain. And so it's worth giving a place that you're looking to go skiing at, or if you're going as part of a group or with your family, give them a call, see what they offer in terms of adaptive classes or lessons, or just adaptive equipment. And maybe not all, but many ski areas do have those sorts of programs. I think we're sort of at a good stopping place. So before we go on to the next topic that we wanted to talk about, I'm just going to ask Emily if we have any questions or comments in the chat that it would be good for us to address.
Hi, Carla. This is Emily. I am not seeing any questions or comments at this time, so we are okay.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, we will move on to our next topic, which is sort of looking more at the local level and how to form connections with parks departments, recreation centers, gyms, and other local community groups. Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about what some of those partnerships have looked like for MWABA, and how sort of things work at the local level here in the DC area?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Carla. So I should preface this kind of as well by saying that, I think it's really important that folks recognize that you don't need perfection. All you need is momentum. And I know Carla will talk more about this, but MWABA really began with like a few tandem bikes and a handful of a few tandem bikes, kind of a handful of blind riders, and a willingness to try before we sort of organizationally had all the answers. Not to say we do, because we definitely still don't have all the answers. But it's really important also to kind of start to build these long-term relationships with your city or county rec departments. So I find it helpful to frame access as a mutual benefit, right? So it's not just like, oh, please give us space or we need help, which may be true, but you're bringing a community that they may not have reached up until this point, right? So I think it's really important to kind of reframe it sort of in that context. Offering clear, consistent logistics. So, right, like dates, volunteer roles, equipment needs, and sort of your safety protocols. That helps build and establish trust with maybe partners who could be perhaps a little bit more hesitant. You really want to emphasize, right, that accessibility isn't about like huge budgets. It's really about, certainly in the beginning, at least, some of these smaller, more structural shifts. So like consistent ride start points, tactile signage, or having kind of volunteers trained on how to guide folks. So I keep talking about this relational model that we have, but the thing for us with MWABA is we keep showing up. We're present, we're consistent, inviting others in, and that does help to build sort of institutional trust. So thinking about it this way as well, I think it's helpful. You don't really need to try to launch like a massive program from day one. That's just not practical or realistic. You need kind of one rec center to try, one trail that works, and maybe one afternoon that brings people together. And then from there you grow. So then I have a list of just things that folks that we've worked with or are sort of exploring to work with or in conversations with. So DC Departments of Rec, DPR, as far as we've used. I'm thinking of our Bake Off, where we've worked with them on sort of getting access to a field that way and some other conversations. I joined the board a little less than 2 years ago, so maybe Carla has a little bit more insight into some of those. We had a state park reach out to us actually a couple of months ago because we had a birdathon in May that actually made the Washington Post. And so somebody from Mason Neck State Park actually, is it a state park? I think it's a state park. I apologize. But they're down in Virginia and they reached out to us about like accessible hiking and sort of providing greater access for blind and low vision folks in the park. So we've been talking about partnerships with them. We use the Columbia Heights Community Center for one of our activities called Goal Ball. And we've also used a place called Circle Yoga, so like a yoga studio for one of our programs. So I say all this not to like, beat a dead horse, but I think it's really important, to that access, sort of access to some of these spaces can look different depending on your org and just, having a conversation. I think it really starts there. And anyway, I'll pass back to Carla.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. And I am going to talk, I know we keep mentioning that, we'll talk about how we started in WABA, and I will plan to talk about that a little bit later on. But rather than doing that now, I will turn it over to Sam to talk more about some of the local partnerships that Achilles is forming in the DMV area.
Thanks, Carla. And I'm going to start off with kind of the what of Achilles partnerships before I hand it over to James to talk about the how. But the Achilles DMV chapter, we are always exploring new partnerships. And I think similar to what Kevin said, where we're looking for that mutually beneficial partnership, some reasons why we might partner might be things like bringing in adaptive sport to a region of the DMV that didn't have it before. It might be to increase our own membership and recruitment for guides and athletes, and then giving other adaptive sports options to our members that they might not have tried before. So a couple of things that we have in the works would include working with philanthropies, county government, gyms, and even a sports influencer. So our philanthropic group that we've been partnering with recently was the Foundation Fighting Blindness. We joined them at their Vision Walk 5K and fundraiser, and that was a real opportunity for us to engage with the Baltimore community, share about Achilles, and talk with folks who might not have been as aware or as involved in adaptive running or cycling. With county government, we've been working with Montgomery County Parks in Maryland. And we're hoping that we'll be able to plug into their existing adaptive sports programs. They have some really great stuff around mountain biking and tennis, just to name a few. And so we want to make sure that we're able to bring athletes from the DC area there. And we've even started talking to them about the possibility of having kind of a satellite workout in one of their parks in the future. When it comes to gyms, we've been really lucky. We have an Achilles athlete who competes internationally in the adaptive vision of a sport called High Rocks. And if you haven't heard of it before, you're not familiar, it is a race that combines running with functional fitness activities like sled pulls, rowing. Think of it as like a 10K with CrossFit. It's pretty intense. But we really like this idea of exploring a partnership with High Rocks because during the winter months, a lot of our guides and athletes, they're not really looking for outdoor training. It gets a little chilly. And so we'd love to give folks an opportunity to do cross training during the winter. And then lastly, we have built a fantastic relationship with Lindsay Rambo, who is a legally blind athlete, educator, and author who lives in Loudoun County, Virginia, and really wants to bring an Achilles chapter out there. So together with her, we hosted a 5K in her community at Great Country Farms. If you're in the Mid-Atlantic area, it's a great little place to pick apples and enjoy local produce. And we've been working with her to lay the groundwork for our first Virginia-based chapter there. So that's a little bit about the what, and I'd love to hand it over to James to talk more about how those partnerships started and how we're keeping them going.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I want to touch a little bit on how to partner with other organizations. So for starters, definitely do your research on the other organization, whether you've reached out to them or they've reached out to you first. Have a very solid understanding of your organization's mission, along with the capabilities and limitations. Don't be so quick to say no if it doesn't measure up exactly, um, on the first conversation. And like Kevin said, don't expect 100% success rate from right off the bat. If you need support from an organization, a gym, or a rec center, pursue footholds with those organizations. You're just looking for a foot in the door. That very first offer they might make to you, whether it's tabling at an event that doesn't exactly line up with your organization's mission, or whether it's, coming out for an event on a day where you might have other things. If you really need their support, it might be worthwhile to say yes. Um, uh, and then you can foster those relationships from there. Again, you don't have to foster that entire relationship on the very first conversation. You do need to build some rapport, and that takes time. Um, and then along those same lines, if it absolutely does not support your organization's mission, don't be afraid to say no. So I know I said at the beginning, don't have your first instinct to say no, give it a chance. But if it turns out to not line up, say no, and it's okay to not spend the resources on something that doesn't support your mission. Um, and you need to sell your organization. Don't have any qualms about doing that. So again, knowing your mission, knowing the capabilities and limitations, sell it, because that's going to directly translate to support for your members. Along the same lines, if you're a forward-facing person for your organization, say like a chapter lead or an ambassador, or an outreach coordinator, you also need to sell yourself, because you are the organization in their eyes. And you're looking for that foothold, and that foothold might just be that small connection. So that's I think that's how we've been able to foster a lot of the relationships that Sam has talked about. We know our mission, we're able to sell it. And then it also is very worthwhile to bring your participants with you for those meetings too, because no one can sell your organization like the people receiving support from it. So I'll pass it back to you, Carla.
Thanks, James. Andrew, did you have anything you wanted to add on this topic of local partnerships before we switch gears and start talking about equipment and funding?
Yeah, I just wanted to go off of the point about not setting expectations too high, but being really flexible when working with partner groups. I think the communities we're working with and looking to best outreach to, I think, have a lot of overlap and nuance, and so not putting yourself in too small of a bubble is always a great idea. Also, in my experience from being a chapter coordinator, a lot of our events will bring in new people because of word of mouth or friend suggestions, and so even if you table an event where 60 to 80% of people who stop by are not in need of the community or event you're doing, they might know someone who will be. And I always think that slow progress over time is how these programs grow, and that's what they're all about. You don't need to set a high expectation for a super high amount of numbers or people. Just making it accessible for one person, I think, is always great. And I think not being shy to ask, and just if you're trying to start an organization or group, just remember it's about community and bringing people together. It's not like a sales pitch. So I think people be more welcome to hear you discuss your interest, your ideas, and they won't be apprehensive. So get rid of those psychological blocks we all put on ourselves.
That's really helpful, and I would just sort of co-sign and plus one everything that folks are saying about just showing up, just being present at events. You never know what sorts of connections you're going to make. You know, in over the years that I've been involved in MWABA, we have these bike jerseys that we've um, bought and that we wear on rides, and we'll sometimes, you know, meet people as we're on the ride. We've eventually, in the latest iteration of the bike jersey, added our website so that people can see it as we're riding by and say, yeah, come check us out online. But you know, encounter people in all sorts of environments when you're trying to make those connections, and even sometimes when you're not. I've had conversations about MWABA, you know, in the subway system, just talking to somebody about activities we both like to do. So just always sort of having that idea that you never know when you're going to make a connection that could turn out to be very valuable down the road, you know, for the organization or for your own sports and recreation journey. I wanted to talk a little bit about adaptive equipment and other things that might seem to be barriers. You know, you might hear about a really cool event you want to attend, but it's not in the town where you live, and you'd have to pay for travel to get to it. You know, a training camp or a try it camp or something like that, or just, you know, a certain type of bike that you need, or climbing gear, like Andrew mentioned. You know, so I wanted for all of our participants to touch on what should people do or know about when it comes to adaptive equipment. Like, do you need to have your own equipment, or are there ways to subsidize the cost and find a way to purchase things, whether it is equipment or whether it's, you know, travel to an event or something like that that may be financially prohibitive. Kevin, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Carla. Let me just turn the camera back on. Yeah, so this is an area about which I'm particularly excited. I've been running MWABA's fundraising committee for a little over a year now. So, and as Carla kind of alluded to, so funding can feel or really be an actual barrier. It can feel like one or actually be like a serious barrier, both from the organizational standpoint, but also for participants of an organization. So a lot of adaptive programming really starts with kind of creativity and relationships, not just grants, although grants are great, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. So I talk a lot about, on this call anyway, I've talked to you all a lot about our tandem biking program. It's by far our most popular program, for sure. So, but MWABA's, I mean, we have a pretty vast programming, but tandem is definitely our most popular. I'm just looking at the numbers. So MWABA's, for example, MWABA's tandem fleet of tandem bikes came together through kind of a mix of personal donations, small grants, and resource scavenging. I don't know the history behind every bike, but every bike has a story. And I think we're somewhere up to about 15, 16, 17 bikes. I've lost count, to be honest. So, you know, local bike shops are often willing to donate labor or equipment, especially if you frame it as sort of a way to expand access to underserved riders. So that's kind of one thing that we have done before, and also it keeps it local, right? It keeps it in the community, even if, you know, we never ask for free stuff, but, you know, oftentimes it's likely lower cost and it keeps it local in the community, right? So, and going off that, thinking small and local. Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, family foundations, even disability employee resource groups, or ERGs at big companies. I bring up the Lions Club thing because we've started engaging our local Lions Clubs here in the DMV area as part of our fundraising work. We haven't, you know, we've put it out there. It's a work in progress. We haven't actually heard back from. We've reached out to two. We haven't heard back yet, but all it takes is one yes, right? So, one thing you can also do is leverage equipment sharing. So, kind of pooling resources with maybe similar programs in nearby cities. I go back to the bike thing. We have there's a tandem group down in Alexandria where they go with a lot of blind folks. I think they are sort of an offshoot of Potomac Peddlers. So, we've done some stuff with them. Mutual aid matters too, right? So money is great, but mutual aid does matter. So sometimes the person who gets you a helmet or a ride is another athlete, not necessarily a funder. So access doesn't always come from big institutions. It can, for sure, but it comes from people who care enough to say, I've got an extra tandem, I'll drive, I'll help. And that's how we've survived and really thriving. I would say, like, don't be afraid to like go for some of these grants. Stuff that I thought was like, oh, that's a shot in the dark, we've gotten. And $5,000 can go a long way. It has helped. I think being open and places where you wouldn't think to look. I'm being sort of vague. I don't know how specific to get, but yeah, I would just say I think it's important that people are open. And we had as part of our fundraising, one of the people in our committee, we had a very generous donation from their work. So things like that can go a really long way. And just being open. And I think it was James who said also, like, as far as, don't be afraid to sell yourself, sell the organization. I love talking up MWABA, especially as I'm kind of a walking advertisement with the jersey, right? So, yeah, there you go. Give back to Carla.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, Kevin alluded to grants, and I wanted to mention just a couple, and these will be on the resource list too that we'll show at the end. For individuals who know what you need. You may not know what you need, or you may not need anything that costs money, which is great. But if you have a particular piece of adaptive equipment that you want help paying for, there's a group called Challenged Athletes Foundation, and they have a grant cycle every year. And that's a great way of, you do have to put together sort of an application packet with a cover letter and a note from a doctor or something explaining that, you have a disability related need for this piece of equipment. It's not only equipment, it also can be for, attending races or training camps or things like that. But because they are geared to individuals, they're particularly helpful for things like buying a tandem bike or buying a, recumbent trike or something that, you want, but that is pricey. And there's another group called Foreseeable Future Foundation, which does grants both to individuals and organizations focused on blind and visually impaired folks. So those are a couple. I'm sure there's others out there. And I agree sometimes, in-kind donations, just I know that CoMotion, which is a tandem bike manufacturer, that's who makes the tandem bike I own, they also have a program you can apply for like a discount on their bike, and then you also get lifetime maintenance on the bike, which is great. So going right to the manufacturers, and yeah, I think bike shops, REI, places like that, even if they're not going to donate money, they can often just help you out with equipment itself. Andrew, I have you up next to talk about um, equipment and money.
Yes, so I think another way to approach equipment is reaching out to regional sales reps for companies and maybe asking for small amounts of equipment and making long-term plans. So for example, in the DC chapter, We were lucky to be gifted 5 Gree many years ago. Grees are a assisted braking device or a belay device used in rock climbing. They're a bit more on the pricey side because they have additional safety measures and components in a standard belay. And it's the belay device of choice for our rock climbing clinics. Um, Not all of our climbing volunteers will have one because they'll have another belay device. And so having someone extra on hand is great. And, rather than asking for like 30 or a large amount to be able to hand out to people or to have for a large scale event, just by asking for a small amount like 5, we were able to get that. So I think, setting goals small, making long-term planning and reaching out to vendors for small donations, you might be able to have a higher success rate. And on that note, maybe breaking down and categorizing like what gear and equipment you need into certain groups. So if it's single-use items that you can't share readily between people, whether it's like a hygienic thing or just a practicality thing, like people can share tandem bikes for meetup rides, but if you want to take a bike for a ride in 5 states across for a weekend, it's not going to be usable for someone else the next day. Whereas something like a rock climbing harness, our host gym lets us borrow harnesses they have for our events because they're designed to be worn by multiple people many, many times over a couple of years before they have to get retired. So if you break down your list into gear that you can reuse or use between multiple people and gear that you can't, that might make it easier to get the gear in a more cost efficient, quicker way. And then also breaking up your gear into smaller cost items that if you get them first, you might be able to hold your events or increase the accessibility to your recreation at a faster scale, and then do long-term planning for the large cost items. And then another thing that I think is harder to plan for now because there's a lot of variables that just out of our control, but trying to use your network of um, peers, community members, volunteers, etc., to see if their company might be interested in a donation for gear. We used to have a volunteer at our DC rock climbing group that their company was very generous and they donated money every year to help hold an outdoor climb or to replace some of our adaptive equipment that was running towards the end of its lifespan. And I think, when you break things down to the small line items, it's usually more successful to get a company to do it. Whereas sometimes with grants, although they're extremely important and helpful, if you have lots of organizations, competing for these large scale grants, like that's very competitive. It's very costly, but asking a medium to large size company for something that's extremely relatively low cost item for them, but very valuable for you might be a good pathway to consider. And back to you, Carla.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, lots of really good practical advice there. Um, Sam or James, would you like to add anything from the perspective of Achilles?
Yeah, I would definitely love to. So, I mentioned earlier that we are a service providing organization. I want to touch on that in just a second, but I also want to say that you mentioned Challenge Athletes Foundation. I myself have received a grant through one of their veterans programs. And what I've found in going through that grant process on an individual basis is don't be afraid to ask more than once, because the squeaky wheel often gets these. Now touching on our organization as a service providing organization, we are an international nonprofit. So we have a far and wide reach, and a lot of our funding does come from that higher organization. So our resources are a little bit spread out, and we need to make them work for all of our participants or as many as we can get. The only way that we can do that is if we have the equipment and we use it across multiple people. So we don't give out grants for equipment. We get the equipment, and if there's an athlete that has a particular need, then we go get that extra piece of adaptive equipment. And then we hold that for when they come participate with us. So uh, on that note too, we give grants for traveling. Um, Part of our initiatives, we call the Start Lines Initiative. We want to remove barriers to bring athletes to races. I mentioned earlier that having a goal and a network is really important in creating that recreational space. So that is we provide the goal in trying to get them to the race, and that's something they can work up towards. So we fund that. To apply for that, we have what we call the Cordani family grant. The CEO of Cigna, David Cordani, and his family donated a huge sum of money for us to give to our members for their dream races that they want to run or walk or adaptive cycle in. To be competitive for those grants, you need to be an active member of a chapter, or if you live outside of a chapter, you know, you need to make yourself known, and then you need to come to the events when offered to you, so that we know you're still interested in being an Achilles member, and so that we can keep providing services for you. Once you're an active member, then you have your own online Achilles portal and our Rosterify database, and then you can apply right inside of that portal. Um, as an organization too, I mentioned that we have some funding from grants. Our DMV chapter, although we get some funding from our higher organization, it is incumbent on us, on me as the chapter lead, to search for people and organizations in this area to partner with that might be willing to give us grants. So again, we're competing for against the other chapters in Achilles for money. And then we're also looking locally for people that would want to restrict funds to our DC and Baltimore chapters, which further fund our activities.
Great. Thanks so much, James. So I think this would be a great time to talk about, kind of starting an organization from scratch, and maybe some of these ideas about, grant funding are one helpful piece of that, because usually to get something off the ground, money is one of the things you might need. But as Kevin alluded to, you shouldn't have the lack of financial resources or the lack of organizational infrastructure sort of hold you back from starting. Sometimes the hardest thing is to just get going. And then once you get going, often the momentum can really keep things in motion and keep things growing. One thing leads to another, more people, get the word out, and things just grow and take on sort of a life of their own. But how do you get a program started if there's really nothing in your community? First of all, I would say, talk to your friends, talk to, think about what it is that you would like to create. I mean, is it something that you just want to run with your local running club and you want a buddy to run with you, or you want to figure out how to participate in swimming as someone with a spinal cord injury? What's like a safe way to do that? You just want to figure out something for you personally to do to keep active. Then maybe talking to whoever's running that activity in your community, and brainstorming ways to adapt it, or going to a group like Move United that has those sort of nationwide resources, and saying, how do I adapt this sport so that I can participate in it, with my disability? What are the workarounds and the best ways of making that happen? And just getting that information, then sharing it, with your local like YMCA or rec center. If you want to start more of a group, like we've been talking about, a community group where it's not just for you personally, but for other people to join and to participate in these activities together. What does starting a group look like? What do you need to kind of make it to scale it? So for me, and when we started the Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes, which I will also call MWABA because it's quicker to say, when we started the group, it was just like a couple of friends sort of chatting at the bar about, it would be really cool if we had a group like both of us had participated in groups in other places where we lived. I lived out in San Francisco, and there was an adaptive sports group out there, and wanted to create something similar in the DC area. So one of the first things we thought about is, well, what activities we should have, some fun activities that will gather everyone together. to, sort of be a something we can hype and talk up and get people excited. So the first thing we decided, since both of us had been goalball players, and Kevin mentioned the sport of goalball, which is an adaptive sport that's played in the Paralympics by blind people, we wanted to have a goalball clinic. So just try it out, see what it's like, decide if you like it. So what do we need in order to create that event? We need a space to host it. We need some equipment, and we need to get the word out so that people actually show up to the event and it's not just, the three of us hanging out in an empty gym. So, we did create some infrastructure to say we wanted to have this, organization exist as MWABA. So we created a website. We did some of those sort of infrastructure steps, but really a lot of it was organized around having this big splashy event. We picked a date. We shopped around to find a gym that would host the event, and we got some donated equipment, some hip pads and knee and elbow pads, and eye shades, which basically is so that sighted people or people with any level of vision can participate, because when you're wearing the shades, you're functionally totally blind. And so we had this sort of big splashy event, and it went really well. We put the word out to a lot of the local blindness organizations, to Lions clubs, as Kevin mentioned. We had flyers. We just had a lot of our family and friends come, and we filled the room. There was a lot of buzz. It was exciting, and then we took lots of pictures and videos, which we could then put up on our website and say, hey, look at this cool organization and look at all the cool things it does. And that, kind of built a little bit of that momentum and that buzz. And then more people who weren't able to make the event, we had a thing, join our email list. And people were emailing that saying, well, when is the next event going to be? I missed out on the goalball clinic. I want to come to the next thing. But then, because not every event can be a big splashy event and it's time consuming to plan, we wanted to have some other more low key events that were more sustainable, where we could keep offering programming continuously, but that was sort of low effort to plan. And so that's why the next thing that we did pretty consistently was, I think it was bi-weekly in the beginning, yoga classes. And back then we hosted them at branches of the DC Public Library, because those are free, before we made the connections with the yoga studios. So it was a little, bring your own yoga mat if you had one. We had a few that we either bought or had donated yoga mats, and we would just, lay them out on this room in the library. And we had different friends who were yoga instructors who donated their time, and that became an event that was sort of regular, and people, got to know each other through it. And then we worked up to the tandem bikes, which, as Kevin mentioned, was a big component and has really taken off as a popular piece of what MWABA offers. But that took a couple of years. We started the organization in 2015. We didn't start running bike rides until 2017, because we needed to put some things in place. We needed a place to store the bikes, and that was a partnership with the Washington Metropolitan Transit Agency, or WMATA. It's actually confusing. There's WMATA that starts with a W, and MWABA that starts with an M. But WMATA donated these bike lockers. I guess I shouldn't say donated. They built them, but we do pay rent for them. But they built larger bike lockers than the ones that they typically have out, so that they could accommodate tandem bikes. And they built them right near metro stations so that they're easy to get to. And those became the starting points for our weekly tandem rides at those metro locations. So finding spaces to, host events that are easy for people to get to. And then we got a few bikes. As Kevin said, each bike has a story, and I don't have time to get into all of the stories, but some were purchased used, some were donated, and we have many more bikes now than we did then. But we had a couple, maybe 3 bikes, enough to get started, and again, sort of did the big splashy event. In that case, the big splashy event was in the spring of 2017, and it was a tandem, orientation, learn how to ride a tandem bike. And we put up flyers in lots of bike stores, and we publicized the event with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, which is another group with a similar sounding acronym here in the DC area that runs a lot of bike focused events. And we got a lot of people who were interested in learning how to captain a tandem as a sighted person, come out to learn how it all worked, to sign up for our mailing list, and then we just started running the rides each week from there. We in the beginning couldn't accommodate everyone who wanted to ride because we didn't have enough bikes, so there was a waiting list. And fortunately, as time has gone on and the size of the program has grown, we don't have to turn people away as often as we did in the beginning. But people, we started to find people who had their own tandems that they would sort of bring with them to rides, and then we didn't have to acquire all of the tandems ourselves, but our members would show up at rides with their own bikes, and that helped sort of increase the size of the fleet. And through having these big splashy events, and inviting all the local cycling groups, we then formed those partnerships that they would often offer us discounted or free tickets to organized bike rides. And so, we sort of built those partnerships in ways that we would offer to the bike shops and folks that advertised our rides. We could list them as sponsors on our bike jerseys. So definitely finding ways to sort of have those mutualistic partnerships that Kevin mentioned, and cross promoting, our partner organizations, and finding ways to help each other out and give each other good publicity. So that's a little bit about how MWABA started. We are now up to, I don't even know, hundreds of, probably 500 plus people on the mailing list, have all sorts of different activities that we offer, including the hikes. Oh, a while ago, I think Kevin had mentioned partnerships with parks departments. The very earliest hikes we ever did were at Great Falls Park with the National Park Service, and they were guided hikes with naturalists who, talked about the flora and fauna and history of the area. And those were so popular, we only did them once a year, the first couple years, but they were so popular that we decided to have a monthly hike kind of added as one of our regular activities. They're not the guided hikes anymore. We sort of just do our own hikes, as Sam was describing, but that is, we kind of learn from what's popular and what members are interested in and want more of. And we've done a couple surveys over the years to sort of elicit those that feedback and those preferences. What would you like more of, and try to incorporate those new activities into our sort of menu of options. And it's been very exciting to see the organization grow and see people become friends, even outside of MWABA events, and just doing things together, on the weekends, and finding, other ways to have fun in the DC area. And in the last couple of years, we've incorporated camping, overnight camping, traveling by bike to the campsites on the C&O Canal, and this year was in Lake Fairfax. And that's another really great way to build community, and have people, spend some quality time outdoors together. So, in the interest of time, I will stop. I could keep talking about MWABA, but I want to give Sam a chance to talk a little bit about guide training, which I think I saw a question in the chat about, and how that sort of fits into growing and expanding chapters, and forming new programs. So, over to you, Sam.
Sure thing. And I'm trying to see if I can find that question again. Yes, so Achilles, uh, maybe to preface, I know we were talking a lot about like making sure that you just start and there's momentum, and when you join an organization, like it will get going. And yes, I agree with that. And I think it's important from a logistics standpoint to have certain things in place so people feel safe and comfortable when they are invited, when they are a part of the organization. So at Achilles, DC chapter, now that we have a chapter lead with James, me as the program coordinator, we have been investing a lot of time and effort into training our guides in terms of running with a tether, as well as biking with someone who is on a hand cycle, a recumbent bike, or a tandem bike. So what we like to do is when a new guide signs up for the very first time, we actually have them go with an experienced either runner or biker in order to share, best practices around what it means to guide an athlete. We're teaching them everything from how you start the sport to how you're stopping, right? How you're avoiding obstacles in the road, how you're getting around people who are in the park running with you or biking with you as well, and just kind of running them through how they would do this themselves. We have them guide each other as new guides, and then we allow them during their second workout to join a larger group of more experienced guides and athletes to kind of see it in action. And then we'll get to a point where we're pairing guides with athletes by themselves for the first time. And I think that kind of approach to making sure that our guides feel comfortable also makes it so that they come again. Um, I think that when guides feel really invested, they've spent a lot of time, they feel really comfortable, and they're starting to build trust with athletes. It's much more likely that we build a really close-knit community of people who are like, oh yeah, I really want to work out today with so and so. So that's really great. So that is kind of the guide training that we go through with Achilles. I don't know, James, if you want to share anything else about that.
Sure. One thing Sam didn't mention is she often leads the new guy training and she's fantastic at it. So humble brag here. But so yeah, along Sam's point, we typically take a 3 session process. Like she mentioned, it's the very first one is that new guide training. The second one is we call it like a warm handoff of the athlete. So they're paired with an athlete and an experienced guide, and by the end of the session, that new guide is the one guiding. And then on that third session, that new guide is taking the lead, supervised by an experienced guide with an athlete. And then on the very next session, their fourth session now, now they're considered a fully trained guide within our chapter, and they can lead an athlete without supervision. Sometimes, just depending on how many people we have signed up. Um, Although it's not ideal, sometimes guides do end up guiding a little bit earlier than we would have liked. But that's just kind of rolling with the punches with a nonprofit. It's going to happen sometimes. Um, and then what we try to do is once we recognize that a new guide is becoming very comfortable guiding an athlete, we try to give them some sort of responsibility within the workouts. Sometimes they may join new guide training again, but this time to assist with it. And then maybe we'll trust them on the next session to lead that new guide training. We might give them some responsibility with some of the equipment, maybe with some of the bikes. So we try to give ownership as early as we can, and as early as makes sense. Like Sam said, to keep them coming back, so they feel like it's their organization that they own. The exact same way we try to give a goal for athletes to continue participating and a network for athletes to continue participating, so they feel like it's their own organization and place to be.
Thanks so much, Sam and James. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, and I wanted to leave some space for questions, but just since Andrew and Kevin, we haven't heard from you two in a while, anything else you wanted to add on this topic or just in general, any final thoughts?
Okay, I'll take the excuse me, I'll take the final thoughts real quick. I have a few, just being aware of time though. So really, if you want to make recreation accessible, believe disabled people, investing in us, trusting us, and then let us lead. Don't get stuck trying to like perfect everything, or you just won't get anywhere. It's really just getting started. Kind of like Carla was talking about, building something small and real, and then letting it grow from there. People will come and not because it's perfect, because it is honest and welcoming. I bring up the leading thing, and I just wanted to touch on that real briefly. It's an issue it's something that's particularly important to me, on the leadership side. So in the context of MWABA, the 6 of our 9 board members have some level of visual impairment, and I say that because, you know, my view is that we do our best to represent, the leadership largely represents the community where we seek to serve, and that's something that's been really important to me as I really, like, not only as a member of MWABA but now on the board. That's super important to me. And then, um, you know, talking about the hike that Carla and Sam mentioned, just as an example, uh, you know, the blind hikers, we were all hikers, but the blind people and blind and visually impaired people really decided the route, which way we were going to go, what level of support each person needed. And that's what I mean by letting disabled people take the wheel, as it were. So yeah, I could say more on that, but that's kind of my closer.
And then Carla, I'm going to jump in real quick. I'd say the last thing I'll mention is just don't be afraid to try something new. I'm going to throw Carla, not throw her under the bus, but Carla and I have actually done a lot of activities together, and it's just because she has come to me and said, "Hey, I want to do this. Do you want to join me?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And that's the story of how I actually got involved in accessible sports, adaptive sports, and accessible recreation. The woman, Judith, who started the DC chapter for Catalyst, taught me how to belay years before I saw an event happen. She was running it. I came up and said, "This is cool. How do I be a part of it?" She welcomed me. Um, one of our, I had a friend who asked me to do the New York City Marathon with him. So that's how I got into guide running with visual impaired athletes. Carla wanted to do a triathlon. So she said, "Andrew, we're doing this." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." So I got into tandem biking and tries. And it was really great for me. I'd never done a triathlon before. And so I think whether you're on the guiding, program management, volunteering side, or the adaptive athlete side, slash someone who wants to make recreation more accessible to them, just have an open mind and don't be afraid. Go for it. And I'm going to be cheesy one more time, but community is what this all is all about, and community, I think, is what drives it. I wouldn't be in any of these roles or had any of these experiences if it wasn't for my friends and peers. So allow yourself to be as cheesy as me for a few seconds and and just take a leap of faith. And back to you, Carl.
Great. I feel like that's a perfect note to end on. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily, actually. I don't want to run out of time without getting to any questions that we have in the chat. Do we have any questions, Emily?
Hi, Carlos. So this is Emily, and I think you guys answered them because there was a question which I believe, Sam, you addressed about training for those that are interested in being a guide. So I think we answered that one. And other ones in here in the chat are not so much questions, just comments. It seems that you all have really impressed our audience today, and people have loved the information that you have shared. They're just really excited, and now more than ever, about adaptive sports and everything that you shared, and just really enjoy this conversation that we've had today. So thank you to everyone for sharing everything that you have. So this has been great, and I'm actually going to pull up, give me 1 second. I know there have been some questions about all the links that have been shared. So I'm going to pull back up my the slide deck here real quick. Just give me 1 second. It's going to take a second to load, but it will get there. Okay, so some of the resources that Carla and others have shared are now here on the screen. They're also available on our website, and we'll get that posted in the chat box here shortly. But there are some resources here on this slide. These are nationwide and regional organizations with local chapters, those that are joining us today. So our Achilles, Moving United, Catalyst Sports, U.S. Association of Blind Athletes, and Wounded Warrior Project adaptive sports programs. So that is what's on this slide. We also have local organizations that are here in the Mid-Atlantic region, including those that are here today, Metro Washington Association of Blind Athletes. Also mentioned was Pursuit Adaptive Sports, Sportable, and Blind Sports Organization. So these are the local organizations here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And all of these are links. So when you go to the handout and you download the handout from our website, you'll be able to click on these links and take directly to these websites. And also, last but certainly not least, services for finding local guides or funding for travel and equipment. We've got United in Stride, Ability Cycling, Challenge Athletes Foundation, and Foreseeable Future Foundation. So that is what is on this slide. Again, these are links in the handout. Anything to add, Carla, before I go through a few closing slides that we have?
Actually, because you mentioned Ability Cycling, which was a service that I had intended to talk about earlier and forgot, I'm going to just briefly do that in the next minute. So as you've heard, there's sort of activities and organizations that run the gamut from these, groups that you can join and local chapters like Achilles, which I highly recommend, that and MWABA for the community aspect, because you'll get a chance to meet new people. Many people mentioned, coming to the area, not knowing people, it was a way to make friends and meet new friends. Even for me, having been in the area since 2011, I continue to meet new people through MWABA and through Achilles. And so there's just an aspect of sort of expanding your social circle. But if you don't have a chapter, like that or a group like that in your local area, then there are things like United in Stride, which helps you to find, a partner, an activity partner, or maybe a few activity partners to run with or to cycle with. Ability Cycling is sort of a third model, which is just about equipment rental or borrowing for you to use with someone you already know. So if you have a friend or a family member and you want to, do tandem cycling or some other sort of adaptive cycling with your, friend or family member, but you don't have access to the bike, Ability Cycling does sort of equipment rentals, and you can try it out and see if you like it. So that's sort of a third model, and different ways of getting access to the equipment that you need in order to expand and make recreation more accessible. And with that, I think that's all the material that we wanted to cover today. Really grateful to Transcend and the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center for the opportunity to present and to share all this information with you all. I hope to, encounter some of you. Maybe our paths will cross out on the hiking trails or, biking around the DC area for those of you who are local. And I hope that you all will take advantage of some of these great opportunities if you haven't already to get outside and get active.
Great. This is Emily again. Thank you so much, Carla. And thank you to all of our presenters that joined us today. This has just really been a great conversation. I know myself, I have learned so much. And just a few upcoming events at Transcend and the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center. Transcend is hosting a virtual transition conference on August 13th. The ADA Center will host another webinar around the same theme with recreation. We are going to host another webinar on August 27th, Outdoors for All, Advancing Access and Inclusion in Parks. And actually, I think it was you, Sam, who mentioned it, I think, about Montgomery Parks. Montgomery County is going to be leading that conversation on August 27th. So we're excited to hear about them and all of their great programs and initiatives to advance access and inclusion in parks. And then also in September 2nd, the ADA Center will be hosting part 3 in the Human Experience, Black People with Disabilities and Their Rights under the ADA. This is part 3, Fighting for Civil and Disability Rights, Strategies to Overcome Barriers. So that is happening again on September 2nd. And as I mentioned before, in the document, these are all direct links to those registration sites, so you can come and join us. So thank you, everyone. So I think we ended right at 3:30. Not too bad, Carla. We did pretty good. 3:30 on the nose. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. On behalf of the Mid-Atlantic ADA Center, we're so glad you could be with us. And if you have any questions or you need further assistance, please feel free to reach out to us. Our numbers are posted on this slide, 1-800-949-4232, or directly at 301-217-0124. And of course, by email, adainfo@transcend.org, or on our web, adainfo.org. So thank you again, and we hope to see you on our next webinar. Take care.